Thank you all for joining us. We have my mother online, Mrs. Mina Stern, who many of you have heard from already, whether she's been in person here in Johannesburg or on many of our Zoom programs over the last couple of years since the Zoom world has opened up, in particular since COVID. My mother, Mina Stern, is a Holocaust educator, also a second-generation Holocaust survivor herself. As my grandfather, her father was in the concentration camps as well and survived and managed to get to Australia alone with no other family members and rebuilt his life. So that's what she's now dedicated her life to, Holocaust education, as well as a tour guide at Yad Vashem. So anybody that's heading towards Israel in the near future and is scheduling a Yad Vashem tour, make sure to ask for Mina Stern to be your tour guide there at Yad Vashem. I reached out to my mother and asked her to, and I must admit it was very late notice. So, yeah, as we often tend to do, it was very late notice, but thank you for accepting the invitation at very late notice. So we understand that this is a last minute program, but thank you.
Pleasure.
I asked her to come up with a topic that she's busy with or wants to research more on, that is relevant to the Holocaust, that would be able to connect us and make a meaningful discussion and reflection for all of us as we connect at times of destruction, of Tisha B'Av and mourning, and pray for better times for the Jewish people, and better times for Am Yisrael, and better times for Eretz Yisrael as well. I'll just mention that it was only a couple of days ago that my brother Dudi, sent out a message to the family group to celebrate the fact that he's now concluded, I think it's his fourth run of Miluim.
Fifth
run of Miluim, which is a big simcha and joy for his wife, for his children, for his parents, for his siblings. And so our own family is going through the challenging times of Am Yisrael at this particular point in time. Okay, so welcome to my mom, Mina Stern, and I'm going to hand over to you. And please introduce your topic and take it away.
Okay. As it's not customary to greet on Tisha B'Av, I will just wish you all easy fast. And as they say in Israel, a meaningful fast. This is a year where we don't have to only remember our tragedies from thousands of years ago, but we have plenty to think about and daven for today, for the peace in our Holy Land, for the safety of our soldiers. And yes, we are so grateful that Dudi has come back to us safe and sound, Baruch Hashem. And of course, for the release of our hostages immediately. The topic I chose today is very appropriate for two reasons. First of all, it has a lot of personal meaning, and I will get to that later. And secondly, it's very appropriate for a solemn day like Tisha B'Av, because it deals with another solemn day of Rosh Hashanah, which we're also approaching soon. So without further ado, I will introduce the topic. And Rabbi Stern, can you please put up the PowerPoint?
Yeah. One moment.
Okay, so the topic is Faith During the Holocaust, Rabbi Naftali Stern and the Wolfsberg Machzor. If you saw the post that you would have sent about me speaking and the topic, it said it was a little bit of a different topic, but it did mention Rabbi Naftali Stern. And if you were wondering how he is related to us, well, he's not related. Rabbi Naftali Stern was a chazan in Hungary. He was one of the spiritual heroes of our generation. 3 days before Rosh Hashanah in the Wolfsberg camp in Silesia in Germany, just before Rosh Hashanah, he transcribed the high holiday service from memory. On paper, he used scraps of cement sacks, which he had purchased with his bread rations, and he wrote on with a stub of pencil. He wrote the whole Musaf prayer because he was worried that he wouldn't remember it. And it so happened that in this particular camp, the Wolfsberg labor camp, which I'll talk about in a moment, they allowed they ignored the fact that they were having a service on that day. Despite the physical and emotional torment prisoners experienced, Rabbi Stern managed to remember the prayers in their original text and correct order, and wrote them to perpetuate the heroic tradition of observant Jews throughout the generations. I quote, he said, "I wrote it down so I would not make any mistakes as much as possible, because as a cantor, a chazan, who had conducted services for many years, I know the prayers by heart. I know there were many mistakes, i.e. interchanging aleph and ayin and hey at the end of words, but I sat and I corrected it." The next slide, please, Yura. Next slide.
Okay, to show.
Okay. During the Holocaust, with deprivations and constant fear of Nazi terror, it was dangerous but not completely impossible to resist. In addition to armed resistance, there were a number of ways Jews were able to engage in unarmed defiance. One of these ways was through spiritual resistance, maintaining humanity and dignity in the face of Nazi attempts to dehumanize and degrade them. Religious activities and services were forbidden in the majorities of ghettos and camps, yet just disappeared. Second slide, please.
It's coming now.
Okay, yet many Jews prayed, despite the prohibition in the ghettos and the camps, many Jews prayed and held ceremonies in secret. So this particular prayer service, which you see in the photo, is a prayer service in Lodz Ghetto, Poland. There are no photos from the camp that I am talking about. Next slide, please. So my talk is based on the Wolfsberg Machzor. Wolfsberg was a camp, which I said I'll tell you the details more about later, but at the moment I'm talking about Rabbi Naftali Stern, who wrote the prayers of Rosh Hashanah on scraps of cement bags with a stub of pencil, which he traded for his daily ration of bread. And if you know anything about the starvation in the camps, it means the bread that they received was pittance, was moldy, was stale, it was small. In Auschwitz, not specifically in Wolfsberg, and in Auschwitz, for example, the bread contained 70% sawdust. And the reason for that was that it had no nutritional value, and I guess it meant that they wanted the prisoners just to drop dead even quicker. Back to our Machzor. So these are the pages this is the book. This is the book that I have in my possession. It's on sale in Yad Vashem. And the reason why there was a whole book, it's a hardback book. It's quite a thick book. I'm holding it here, so you can see how thick it is and how big it is. And the reason why Yad Vashem decided to print, it's my word, I think, print a book based just on this particular camp, which is not a well-known camp, it's just one of the thousands of labor camps that the Nazis had, is because of the significance of the fact that Rabbi Naftali Stern wrote these tefillahs of Rosh Hashanah, which was very, very unusual, because no prayers were allowed to be held, and certainly nobody possessed any sidurim or tefillin, although there are some stories about people who had tefillin, but maybe I'll raise that later. The Nazi officer in the camp allowed the inmates to gather together and hold prayers for Rosh Hashanah in lieu of breakfast. Note, in lieu of breakfast. Naftali Stern, who by virtue of his sweet voice had been a cantor in Satumar, which is Satmar, led the services, an event the survivors remember as a special moment in the life of the camp. A little bit more about his background. Naftali Stern was born in 1910 in Transylvania. For many years, he served as the chief cantor of the Orthodox community in the town of Satmar. In 1944, German forces occupied Satmar and confined its Jews to a ghetto. Stern was a member of the Burial Society until he, along with his wife Bluma, the daughter of Rabbi Ben Zion Weiss, their 4 children, 10-year-old Tzvi Hirsch, 9-year-old Moshe, 6-year-old Azriel Joseph, and Gittel, aged 14 months, were deported to Auschwitz in late May 1944. Stern was separated from his family in the selection, which he describes as follows. They marched us in a line. We had heard the infamous name of Mengele and knew we were approaching him. A handsome, modern, elegant-looking man stood there. Then he whistled the famous melody, the Blue Danube Waltz, and pointed right or left. When Stern asked one of the Jews who worked in the camp when he would see his family again, the Jew who worked in the camp pointed to the tall smokestack that pierced the sky. 5 days later, Stern was sent to the Wolfsberg camp, which is our subject today, where he wrote down the prayers. In his testimony, as recorded by Yad Vashem, Stern described a particularly emotional moment when he wrote a letter to his wife and tossed it to the winds in the forlorn hope that it might somehow reach her. In Wolfsberg, just a little bit about the camp, the inmates, including Naftali, were forced to dig tunnels and trenches to serve as a defensible bunker for the retreating German army and high command. Now we just discussed Rosh Hashanah, but Yom Kippur was another story. At Yom Kippur, they weren't allowed to have prayers, but at the end of Yom Kippur, 1944, Naftali Stern wrote the following in the camp. Sovereign of the world, you wrote in your holy Torah about Yom Kippur, and you shall torment your souls, meaning to fast completely during Yom Kippur. And in another place you wrote, and you shall safeguard your souls. Lord, my creator and my sanctity, which of the two should I observe? If I continue my fast, it will be my end, and then I will not be able to observe the second commandment. What should I do? I want to fast, and you don't let me. You don't let me, and in spite of that, I will fast. This time I will fight you. You don't let me fast, and I will fast anyway. I believe that I will beat you, but give me the strength to beat you. The above words actually came out of my mouth, and suddenly a heavy sigh burst out of my throat from the depths of my soul. Neither before nor since I had ever felt such a feeling. Immediately, I felt the answer of the Holy One, blessed be He. I felt enormous relief. My hunger ended. New strength came into me, and I continued with both together work for the Germans and prayer to Holy One, blessed be He. The afternoons passed easily for me. I also managed to pray Mincha, the afternoon prayer, and Ne'ilah, the closing service on Yom Kippur, however much I knew still by heart. And in that way, 7 o'clock in the evening arrived. By this time, Yom Kippur had ended. We finished our work and began to march back to the barracks, and he had managed to fast the entire day. When he returned, he gave thanks to Hashem for enabling him to fast, and he even fasted an extra hour to express his gratefulness. Naftali hid the pages on his body until his liberation in 1945. During the next 30 years, each Rosh Hashanah, Naftali hid the crumbling pages under his right hand as he prayed. Rabbi Stern, the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. He recalled the following after the war. We prayed on Rosh Hashanah, and the service was lovely. The service was good. Just disappeared. Below slide, please. But on Yom Kippur, we were unable to pray. The Germans evidently were ready for it. On Rosh Hashanah, they tolerated it, and I received a larger portion of soup in the afternoon, which was worth something. I prayed the entire service less than we do it now. But as he said, it was lovely. I'm sure it was a very, very unique and special moment for them. Every Rosh Hashanah, Rabbi Naftali Stern would spread the pages out and pray from them. He wrote, I know it had already begun to disintegrate, because I wrote it in pencil on the paper from a sack of brown cement, which I bought in exchange for bread rations. As the pages began to crumble, before his death in 1989, when he decided to hand them over to Yad Vashem for perpetuity, he burst into tears, kissing them and saying, "I made the utmost effort to safeguard these. I didn't know then in the camps that what was written would become a national treasure. With God's help, I will read it. I'll read from it every Rosh Hashanah. I will come here during the high holidays to see it." Naphtali, when he donated the pages to Yad Vashem, he stressed that it was vital that future generations understand that in spite of the survivors' harrowing experiences during the Holocaust, they maintained their spirit, embraced their Jewish identity, and never lost hope. In a trembling voice, Naphtali said, "I pray that each subsequent generation will stay true to their Jewish identity and be a link in a long chain." Naphtali's Machzor is on display in the Holocaust Museum at Yad Vashem, along with thousands of similar pieces, each one telling its own unique story with its own special meaning. Each of these artifacts sheds light on the rich tapestry of European Jewish life prior to World War II and the rise of the Nazi regime, and during the war as well, the vanished world of millions of Jews and the survivors' incredible return to life. Naphtali's handwritten prayers, as well as articles about maintaining faith during the Holocaust, is in the Wolfsberg Machzor. So there are 5 pages of scanned copies of the actual Machzor, as well as there are many copies, as well as 5 pages of faith throughout the Holocaust. So that's about the Wolfsberg Machzor. And I told you that it was very appropriate, fitting for 2 reasons. One was that it was very personal to me, which I'll tell you about now. And the other one is that this is a time of supplication, and we pray, like I said, the peace will reign in our country. Okay, the personal side of this story. My father, Yitzchak Tzvi Stern, Tzvi Stern, who you all know, is named after. He was the first grandson who was born after my father's death about 21 years ago. And I have to say that he really does emulate my father. We've got to know him very well during the last 2 years. And now another year he's staying in Israel in yeshiva. And he's a serious matmid, learns Torah, and keeps the mitzvahs very, very, like my father, very seriously. And my father would be very, very proud of him. So my father, like Rabbi Stern in the story, also came from Hungary. And in March 1944, Hitler invaded Germany. And I won't elaborate because I have given the talk about my father before. And in May 1944, like most Hungarians, he was deported with his family to Auschwitz with his 2 brothers, Yisrael Menachem, after whom my second son is named, and Eliezer, his oldest brother. And just like Rabbi Naphtali Stern describes, he described the same scene that Rabbi Mengele was on the platform. Rabbi Mengele was infamous for performing tests on the experiments on the prisoners, pregnant women, disabled people, twins. And he stood on the platform, and my father described him with his hand in his jacket. And just like Rabbi Stern said, he told people to go right and left. And like Rabbi Stern said, my father said that he was promised that he would meet his family on the weekend. And the same thing happened to him. Then another prisoner pointed to the chimney and said, "Do you see the smoke coming out of the chimney? That's where your family is. You're never going to see them again." I always try to imagine the moment where he realized that he was alone. Fortunately, he was selected with his brother Yisrael Menachem to go to work. And later on, they were separated, and his brother did not survive. So my father survived alone. My father never talked about his experiences till much, much later, when my nephew Eli recorded him 4 hours on a DVD that we have, not long before his death. But as children, we knew almost nothing about his experiences during the Holocaust. And second generation did not ask questions. We just accepted that we didn't know. And later on, of course, we all regret, when you come to my age, you regret that you didn't ask a million questions. But about 22 years ago, when we visited Melbourne for Pesach, one of our 2 visits for Pesach during our 31 years that we live in Israel, my father surprisingly brought up the subject of the Holocaust. I couldn't believe it. And he said that on Pesach night, it's customary to relate a personal story where your life has been saved. So he related the following story, and he attributed his salvation, his survival, to this story. When he was in the Wolfsberg camp, which we just talked about, he woke up one morning with some boils on his hands, and he couldn't work. His hands were numb and boils, and he went to, and they had terribly hard labor carrying these concrete boulders and poles, and you have to remember that they were emaciated, maybe 30 or 40 kilo, and he went to the doctor in the hospital in Wolfsberg, and he told the doctor, who was a very nice Jewish doctor, that I have boils and my hands are numb and I can't work today. And the doctor said, do you work inside the camp or outside the camp? And he said, I work outside the camp. So the doctor said, well, if you work outside the camp, I can't help you. But if you work inside the camp, I could. So the next day, miraculously, he was transferred to work inside the camp. He again went to the doctor and said, can you help me? I can't work. Yesterday was absolute torture. And he said, now that you work inside the camp, I can. So he hospitalized my father. And my father was fortunate that he got a job in the hospital kitchen. And with a little ration of bread that he got every day, which every prisoner got, he managed to smuggle it out to his brother because he was in the kitchen. He had plenty of food, and he managed to smuggle it out to his brother. And he related that, it was warm in the hospital and they had clean beds as opposed to the disgusting bunks that they slept on with a few bits of straw, which was covered in blood and excrement. And he was there for a period of time. And every time he saw his boils on his hands getting better, he scratched them so that he would be able to stay longer in the hospital, because he realized that if he is going to be released from hospital, it was the dead of winter. We're talking about terrible, minus 20 degrees and working outside. Even though he was inside the camp, he still worked outside, from 6 a.m. in the morning till 6 p.m. at night. And he kept on irritating his sores that he would not be released. But the Nazi doctors didn't rely on the Jewish doctors because they knew that they were sometimes kind to the Jewish prisoners. And every now and again, Nazi doctors would come themselves to check the prisoners to see who could be released and sent back to work. And the day came and a Nazi doctor came to the hospital, and my father was petrified that he would be found and be released. And he grabbed a blanket and he ran out to an outside toilet, and he sat in fear that he was going to be found. And he sat there, his teeth chattering, absolutely freezing, freezing from the cold, but also freezing from the fear that he would be found. And the Nazi doctor did his rounds and inspected the patients, and fortunately, he did not find my father. And my father managed to spend the remaining winter months in hospital, and to that he attributes the fact that he survived. Now, I always say to the people that I guide in Yad Vashem that it was ordained by God who survives and who didn't, because my father contracted typhus towards the end of the war and he survived, and his brother Yisrael Menachem, who had been separated from him, contracted typhus and died. And when he came back to Koshitsa, his hometown, he actually didn't know what the fate of his brother was, and he was hoping that he would return. And when people went back to their hometowns or wherever they went, sometimes they went to displaced persons camp, they would hang posters every day of people who were looking for surviving relatives. So they were right, has anyone seen, because people had been in so many different camps, has anyone seen this and this person? Or there were signs saying that this person has been sighted. I know where he is. And then people could track down their relatives, and my father would check these postings day in and day out. And unfortunately, no one has returned. But then his cousins came from the camp where his brother had been, and they had to give him the terrible news that his brother had died of typhus. And he's the only surviving member of his family. Okay, we're going to go now on to a different topic. Do we have more time? A few more minutes? How much more time do I have?
It's Tisha B'Av morning. No one's running anywhere.
Okay, so it'll probably be about 10 more minutes. And if you can just put
Right.
on the PowerPoint and show the last slide, please. The next one.
One moment. It's coming now. Okay. Can you see that, man?
I hear, but I don't see the last slide.
Should be showing now. 1 second. You don't see anything on your screen?
Oh, maybe, no, why do
No. Give me a second. I know why. I know why. Give me a second. Okay, there we go.
Okay, so branching out from what I just spoke about, now, everybody knows Auschwitz, everybody knows Treblinka and Sobibor and other camps. Maybe they know Majdanek, and if you've been to Poland, you would have gone to a lot of these places. But the labor camps like Wolfsberg, which I just spoke about, are the lesser known camps. Now, there were thousands of them. Auschwitz itself had three main camps. Auschwitz I, which you can see here, and it has the infamous sign Arbeit macht frei, which means work will set you free, which was all part of the deception of the camp system, that you worked and then you will remain alive. Well, if anything, the work killed them, but it was all deception, because when your usefulness when your time was up, you were going to be killed as well, because Hitler was determined to exterminate all European Jewry. So I want to talk a little bit about the difference in camps, because Wolfsburg, like many labor camps, even though they didn't have gas chambers or crematoriums, the treatment was just as shocking as in the other camps, the starvation and the beatings and working out in the snow for hours on end, 12 hours a day with threadbare clothes, and a pittance of food, a bit of soup, which was water with a few potato peels. In Auschwitz was potato peels floating at the bottom. My father related that there were a few meat pieces at the bottom, but who got the bottom of the pot? And in fact, he told us a story that when they asked the capo was the prisoner who was in charge of the other prisoners. The Germans didn't want to dirty their hands, and they appointed many, many prisoners to be over the prisoners. The capos were in charge of food distribution. They were also in charge of taking the prisoners to their work detail every day and bringing them back. And they would beat them at the slightest infraction if they would just hesitate, or they weren't working at the pace that the Germans thought they could. And the capos were very cruel in many cases. There were also stories of capos who helped the prisoners, but mostly they thought that they were cruel because some of them were criminals, but they were deliberately appointed. That would be cruel. Criminals would be appointed, but also they were promised that they would survive if they were carry out the orders of the Nazis. So that's Wolfsburg and labor camps. I was just telling you the story. So they asked the capo to dish out the soup and take from the substance at the bottom of the pot, so they would have a bit of the meat. And of course, most people ate anything because they had no choice. They had to survive. So even if it was strafe, and not all prisoners, but many. And he started screaming and he started raving and ranting. And my father said he seemed like he'd gone out of his mind. And then my father realized that he was a Pole. Now, the Poles had been deported to the camp system in July 1942, whereas my father and the Hungarians came to the camp system in mid-1944, a whole 2 years later. And he realized that it was a miracle that he was alive, but he's gone completely out of his mind. So back to Auschwitz. So Auschwitz had three main camps. Auschwitz I, which is the one that you see here. And this is a modern photo. The barracks that you see here, the buildings that you see here were not destroyed. They were originally army barracks before they were turned into a concentration camp. Now it's a museum and every building has a different exhibition. I was just there last year, so it's still very fresh in my mind, last year being the fourth time, still very fresh in my mind. And this part of the camp was not destroyed because they only destroyed the gas chambers and anywhere there was evidence of extermination so that they couldn't be arrested. They destroyed everything, documents, the gas chambers, everything they could possibly destroy so there would be no evidence of their guilt as war criminals. Then there was Auschwitz II, which was called Birkenau. I don't have a photo here. And if any of you have seen photos of people who go to the camps now and they take photos of themselves with it, or particularly Israelis, maybe others, Israeli flags on them, on their backs, and they're walking down the tracks, that is Birkenau. And Birkenau was Auschwitz II, where the gas chambers were, 4 gas chambers where the extermination was carried out. In Auschwitz, it was also carried out earlier on. But most of the 1,100,000 Jews who were killed, murdered in Auschwitz were murdered in Auschwitz II, which was called Birkenau. And March of the Living, I don't know if any of you have been. What they do is they march from Auschwitz to Birkenau, which is about maybe a kilometer or more, just to show how the people marched. And it's also symbolic of the death marches, which were at the end of the war, where people had to march hundreds of kilometers in the dead of winter. Of course, many, many people dropped dead and didn't survive. The other camp that you see on your screen is Treblinka. Treblinka was one of 3 death camps. Now, I described Auschwitz with Dr. Mengele selecting people to live. The reason why they selected people to live was because there were German factories which utilized the slave labor of the Jews, and they worked them till their deaths. And that's why people between 16 and 40 were sometimes chosen for work. A small percentage, under 16 and over 40, they were immediately put to death because they weren't useful and they couldn't work. And between those ages, a small percentage were chosen for work, but their lifespan in Auschwitz was about 3 months. They died from beatings, starvation, disease. Typhus was a disease that came from lice, and they were all crawling with lice. So back to Treblinka. Treblinka was one of 3 death camps, Sobibor and Belzec being the other ones, which were established to exterminate Polish Jewry. In Treblinka alone, I think it was 860,000 Jews were exterminated in gas. About 60 escaped. Many more tried to escape, but escaping their fate in general throughout the Holocaust was the chances were practically zero, because anyone who did escape, and there were many escapees from all sorts of ghettos and camps, were 99.99% caught and hung. Together with the whole camp had to watch them so that they would so that would deter anyone else from escaping. So from Treblinka, approximately 860,000 Jews were murdered and about 60 escaped. So what we know about the camp now is based on the reports of those 60 escapees, because what they did after about a year, there was an uprising, which is when they escaped, and they destroyed the whole camp. And then they planted a forest where people had picnics, which were, which was obviously on the grave of all those 860,000 victims. What it meant was, a death camp meant you arrived, you were deceived, you were told that you're going to have a shower because you've been on a journey for a few days and you're sweaty and you're tired and you're dirty. And after, you're going to fold your clothes very neatly and notice the hook where you left, the number of the hook where you left your clothes, so that you will come back after the shower and reclaim the clothes. You will get some warm soup, and then you will be put to work. Well, they were taken into the guest chambers without having any knowledge of what was going to happen, expecting showers, and they were murdered. About 20 minutes later, everybody was dead in the gas chambers. And the Germans would say, "Alle schlafen," everybody's asleep. And then they would begin the horrific work of pulling out the bodies and burning them. So that was the same in Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec. What you see in front of you is the camp presently. Because everything was destroyed in all these camps, the three camps that I mentioned, there are now only memorials. So what you see in front of you, that pillar, two pillars which are joined, I couldn't find an appropriate photo this morning in the last minute. I didn't receive a lot of notice for this talk. And on that pillar, it says never again in a few languages. The rocks that you see, the whole camp is now just rocks. It's a really actually very, very moving memorial, even though there's nothing left of the actual camp like you have in Auschwitz and Birkenau. It's a very moving memorial because each rock is a different shape and each rock has the name of a community. So, when people go there and their origins are from Poland, I know that's not the case with most South Africans. I know that you're from Lithuania, your roots are in Lithuania, but those people who come from Poland would walk around and try to find the rock of their particular community. And of course, it's a very, very moving when they do. Um, they did keep a small percentage of prisoners alive in the three camps that I mentioned because they had to carry out the dirty work, the capo, like I mentioned before. They were the ones that had to tell the Jews what to do, give them the orders, and of course they could never divulge any information about what was going to happen because as far as the arriving Jews was concerned, they're going to have a shower and going to work, and they couldn't divulge any information. And then they would send them into, push them, shove them into the gas chambers, lock the doors, and when it was all over, 20 minutes later, they would open the doors and the Sonderkommando were Jewish prisoners who were given the horrific task of dragging the bodies out of the gas chambers and burning them in the crematoriums. In Treblinka, they didn't have actual ovens, they burnt them on railroad tracks outside. So there was that small percentage were carrying out these horrific tasks. And then when they realized that 60 had escaped and actually survived and could tell about the camp and exactly what was happening, they became wiser. And in Auschwitz, the Sonderkommando, those prisoners, were killed every 3 months. So as they were carrying out the horrific tasks of burning people that they sometimes recognized, sometimes people from their community, sometimes family members, they realized that it was just a matter of time that their time was up and they were also going to be murdered in the gas chambers. And so in Treblinka, there were 860,000 murdered. In Sobibor, I think it was 220,000. And in Belzec, it was 500,000 Jews. Like I said, there were many other camps. If you go to Majdanek, which was also a concentration camp and also a death camp, you'll see a massive mountain. They call it a mountain of ashes, and they are real ashes of Jews who were exterminated, murdered during the camp system. And with that, I am going to end my talk. So thank you very much for listening to me today. And I wish you all...
Mom, you asked me to share another picture at the end?
Yeah, there's another picture? Oh, yeah. Thank you. I didn't know you'd get it in. Thank you.
Well, one second. I'm going to try and get this up. 1 second.
Okay, this was a last minute thing, so I didn't know if you would get it in, but I'm glad that he did.
Give me a second. Let's see if it works. Okay, let's see. Okay.
Okay, so this is my father, Yitzhak Zvi Stern. Everyone called him Herschel. And he married my mother, my beautiful mother, who was from Russia. Her family was from a Chabad family called Gurevich, and my grandparents, Nochem Zalman Gurevich and Basi Gurevich, were one of the, together with my mother, she was 13, and her brother Shmuel, who was 11, they were sent to Australia by the Friedrich Rebbe as emissaries after the Second World War, together with 5 other couples, to develop Yiddishkeit. And in Australia, my mother met my father, and you just heard my father's story. He and my mother had her whole family came out safe and sound from Europe. So we were, Baruch Hashem, very, very fortunate to grow up with grandparents and uncles and aunts and cousins and an entire family. Whereas my father, like I said, was left with nobody. And with that, I will end. So I just want to wish you all, like I said, a meaningful fast. And we should daven for peace in our land and the release of the hostages, safety of the soldiers. And that's it. Thank you.
Okay, Mum, thank you very much for once again agreeing to share with us. And the fact that you make it so personal about your family, our family, is really meaningful. And obviously, it's tragic to hear about these stories, but important nonetheless to hear about these stories. Last night, we had a Lithuanian Holocaust survivor speak to us. There aren't many.
Wow.
Miriam Lazarus is her name. I'll be in touch with you. I'll share with you her story and her book that she wrote. So she shared her story, and she only came to South Africa, I think she said last night, in 1948, after also going through the war, which is quite unique. And she shared her story here in Shul last night for our joint unity program of Siddim Shul and Pine Street Shul. So thank you very much for sharing. I do want to tell the participants online
Okay,
that.
so I'm leaving.
Oh, wait, before you go. There's a question here. Was the Cantor Stern able to pray from his Machzor after he gave it to Yad Vashem?
So once he gave it to Yad Vashem, the truth is that Yad Vashem gives a copy. Anybody who donates anything to Yad Vashem, if it's obviously paper, because they also donate a lot of artifacts, they give them a copy. So the answer is yes, but you have to remember that the pages were crumbling. So maybe the copy, that whatever's exhibited in the museum or what I showed you here is not that clear, but he could pray from it to a certain extent. But more than pray for it, he just would hold it in his hands and remember the fact that God saved him, and this was his lifeline. And Hashem really answered his prayers because he survived. But he would come and visit it. I did mention that Rosh Hashanah he would come and visit the pages before every Rosh Hashanah, until his death.
Wow.
Okay, so I'm going to exit. Thank you all.
Thank you for an easy fast. Just to mention to all our participants before we log off, there is a new film that's been shared just in the last 24 hours. From those who know Gracha, I don't know his first name, Dedi Gracha, the singer's son, is very active in Israel today, post 7th of October, with chesed and kindness and strengthening families, bereaved families, and soldiers who have gone through very, very difficult times since the beginning of the war. So he's just launched a brand new film, which once again is the message of triumph over tragedy. I will put it out. It's on YouTube now. It was just launched last night. So I will put it out on our WhatsApp groups at Shul. If you're not on our WhatsApp groups, try and get hold of me during the day if you want to receive that video. It's a new film that just came out. And as my mother mentioned, for so long, we spoke about the Holocaust as the modern day tragedy. And today, unfortunately, we have our own Holocaust and the 7th of October, and those who have lost loved ones over these last almost 2 years. So this film does show that message of on the one hand, tragedy, on the other hand, triumph, overcoming and rebuilding lives during these dark times. Thank you all for joining us. I wish you all a meaningful fast. And 5 o'clock, we're having mincha at Shul with talis and tefillin, and the conclusion of the fast that ends at 6:07. Please God, this day of Tisha B'Av should be transformed into a day of celebration, the coming of Mashiach. Thank you all.